Good afternoon. I'm Marjorie Turner, Senior Vice President for Program Planning and Management here at the Urban Institute, and I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. I'd like to encourage you to extend and expand today's conversation by sharing your thoughts as it goes along on social media using hashtag #LiveAtUrban. And when you do that, it would be great if you could include the speaker's Twitter handles, which are in your agendas. I also want to welcome everyone who's in the virtual audience. And if you're tuning in on the webcast and you want to join the conversation, submit questions anytime to events@urban.org, and someone will pass those up to the moderator at the appropriate moment. So I'd really like to thank JPMorgan Chase for supporting this convening and for the larger body of work on systems change strategies for community colleges. The Urban Institute and JPMorgan Chase have been working together since 2014 to leverage data and analysis with the goal of expanding economic opportunity and strengthening communities. This collaboration has been tremendously rewarding from our perspective, aligning the expertise and resources of an enormous bank with the knowledge building capabilities of the Urban Institute to really advance solutions on the ground with evidence, with data, with analytic tools. And it's exciting for us to see the actionable evidence that our collaboration has produced on quite a wide range of issues of critical importance to communities across the country, including financial capability, housing and community development, and workforce development, the topic we're here to talk about today. In our work with JPMorgan Chase, we're supporting the replication and the scaling of effective approaches to post-secondary education and training that meet the needs of both students and employers. And our focus has been on policies and programs that support career pathways for adults and for young people who aren't following a traditional college path. And community colleges are, of course, a really important cornerstone of that endeavor. So in today's event and in two others in this series of gatherings, we're exploring how community colleges can connect students to employment opportunities, build meaningful short-term credential programs, and contribute to student advancement over time along a career pathway that has real payoffs for them. And today we're thrilled to be able to have two panels that will share their thoughts on how community colleges can effectively align their programs with employer needs and connect their students to meaningful employment opportunities. I'm going to be handing off the mic in just a minute to Monique Baptiste, Vice President of Global Philanthropy at JPMorgan Chase. Monique supports JPMorgan Chase's investment in education and workforce training systems that promote economic opportunity and narrow inequities in labor market outcomes for groups that have historically faced serious and significant barriers to opportunity. Before she joined JPMorgan Chase, Monique served as Vice President of Programs at the Newark Alliance and Director of the Greater Newark Workforce Funders Collaborative, where she was responsible for connecting private philanthropy to innovative workforce development initiatives targeting low-income workers. In March of this year, JPMorgan Chase announced a $350 million 5-year global workforce initiative to prepare for the future of work and meet the growing demand for skilled workers. And this builds on the firm's earlier 5-year, $250 million commitment that began in 2013. So this refreshed, expanded new skills at work investment will provide very substantial support to community colleges and to other non-traditional career pathway programs. And we're really proud that Urban has been able to contribute to this expanding initiative with rigorous evidence on key issues like the immigrant workforce, employer engagement, and career pathways. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Monique, who will tell us a bit more about the work ahead for JP Morgan Chase, and then pass the baton on further for today's panels. So thank you and welcome again.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining this very important session today. We are grateful at JP Morgan Chase for the thought leadership that Urban brings to this space. And we're thankful for the partnership on this exciting series of events that are helping us collectively strengthen the capacity of community colleges. As mentioned earlier, this is a critical part of JP Morgan Chase, our kind of relaunched New Skills at Work initiative, which is really focused on how the future of work is evolving the demand for skills for workers across the country, and how an investment in supporting and building skills will create economic mobility and career pathways for workers in hundreds of communities across the 40 countries around the world that we're invested in. A key focus of our New Skills at Work initiative is on a $125 million commitment to strengthening education and training systems necessary to improve employer and educational partnerships, including that of community colleges, to ensure that they can work together to meet the growing demand for talent. This alignment between supply and demand is a critical component to helping increase the number of individuals who have the skills that they need for in-demand jobs, both now and then also in the future. Decades ago, 3 out of 4 jobs really required no more than a high school education. But today, 2 in 3 jobs require at least some sort of post-secondary education and training. And community colleges, which we know to be the largest workforce training provider in most communities, are critical to meeting that need of industry as they train more and more individuals, over 6 million individuals a year, which accounts for over 1/3 of undergraduate students worldwide. We at JP Morgan Chase are invested in the ability of these institutions to adopt practices that will ensure that more students are graduating and entering into the labor market with the valuable skills and credentials that employers like JP Morgan Chase require. And so we're taking a comprehensive approach to building the capacity of these institutions to prepare students with in-demand skills and economic and really robust economic development and economic mobility opportunities. Specifically, we're focusing our investment on a few key areas. The first is fostering leadership. In partnership with the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program, we are focused on developing and preparing diverse community college leadership who will transform community colleges to achieve higher levels of student outcomes and student success. We're also invested in building capacity in each of our target communities by providing community colleges with the tools and resources that they need to strengthen their core practices. Our team at JP Morgan Chase is working diligently across the country with community colleges to identify opportunities to strengthen operations and improve labor market outcomes for students. For instance, we support efforts like City University of New York's Career Success Initiatives, a university-wide consortium that is engaging technology employers to design curricula and recruit talent from CUNY programs. With our support, faculty redesign course models in partnership with employers, and students are benefiting from employer-informed career pathways that guide their educational choices and lead them to real-world experiences. Community colleges around the country are incubating exciting new models and programs. And like these, we really want to continue to prepare these millions of students for promising careers of the future. We're excited to spotlight some of these efforts today on the two exciting panels that will be coming up in a moment. And we're really looking forward to advancing the conversation on how we can strengthen partnerships between employers and essential community colleges in every community that we serve. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the panel.
It did. Great. Thank you all for being here today, and especially those online as well, to hear how community colleges are successfully connecting students to employment. Just as a note, I'm Lauren Eister. I'm a senior fellow here at the Urban Institute. I'm going to be your moderator today. Just to kick us off, I just wanted to say, this first panel really focuses on an important strategy for connecting students to employment, community college and employer partnerships. These are vital parts of what community colleges do today. And these partnerships can happen in many ways, but today we really want to better understand strong partnerships, where community colleges and employers collaborate to ensure programs offered truly create a pipeline of workers with the skills that employers really value and need. Today we plan to address with our fabulous panelists here questions about the nature of these successful partnerships, including the collaborative process, as well as how to sustain these partnerships over time and really draw lessons from our panelists here that you all can take home with you, really think about. So just for introductions, I'd first like to welcome Kenneth Adams, who is Dean of Workforce and Economic Development at Bronx Community College and the City University of New York, CUNY, which Monique just mentioned. And he oversees adult and continuing education, workforce development, career services, and community and economic development. Next to him is Molly Scott, my wonderful colleague, who's a principal research associate at Urban, whose recent work has focused on employer human resource practices, as well as employer and community college partnerships. So she's perfect up here to give us some context to everything. And her recent work includes a U.S. Department of Labor study with our partners at Apt Associates on strong employer-community college relationships, really from the perspective of employers. So we really got to hear from them, and it's great to have her here. Next to her is Shanika Hope, Head of Content and Research at Amazon Web Services, and is our employer voice on the panel. We couldn't have this panel without having an employer up here to speak about their experiences. But Shanika also has 25 years experience in education, so she understands both sides, and we're really glad to have her here. She is here with Steve Partridge, who is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Workforce Innovation at Northern Virginia Community College, fondly known as NOVA. And NOVA and Amazon Web Services began collaborating a couple years ago, and Shanika and Steve will talk about how they've developed and scaled this partnership in a very short amount of time. So they've got a lot of great lessons as well. So thank you all for being here today. So Steve, I'm going to start with you. You're here with your employer partner, Shanika, and it would just be great if you could tell us a little bit more about your work at NOVA and how this partnership came about.
Sure. I'd like to say that we called on Amazon Web Services one day and said, we've got a program for you, and they said, tell me more, come on out. And that's not usually how partnerships start. This was one of those things where our board chairman had run into Teresa Carlson at one of the many networking events he's always at, and called me and said, Amazon Web Services wants to do an apprenticeship. Can you do it? I said, yeah, we can do any sort of training. Yeah, we were good at this. They want to launch something in 6 weeks. Now, The one thing I've learned in all my years of working with business is never say no, because that just closes the door. So I said, sure, we can do that. And what began as a dialogue, one, to cool down my staff after what I just promised, but to really learn what they were trying to think about an apprenticeship program was, because I had experience with apprenticeship, and what they were proposing was not anything like what I was used to doing previously in Charlotte with the manufacturing world. This was a front-loaded program where you did all these industry credentials up front, and their first cohort was a group of individuals that already had computer science degrees. They had security clearance because they're all ex-military, and they all had A+ certification. So these are people that are high value targets for other employers to hire, and they're saying, no, they're not quite work ready yet, which was, we left scratching our heads going, these people are not work ready. This is disturbing, because this is what we tell everyone they should go into. And so that's what began the dialogue of really just listening a lot to Amazon and saying, here's what we need for these technologists in this very high demand area of cloud computing. And what are the skills necessary? Because what we were teaching our students in the 2-year, and what we were seeing come out of the 4-year, we're not meeting that. And so the dialogue began there. It has grown a lot since then. We do apprenticeship for different folks now, some with no degrees, all the way up through degrees. We launched a cloud computing program with them, a new associate degree in cloud computing. And we have other things in the works that we continue to strengthen and grow as we've worked over the past 2 years.
That's great. So Shanika, could you tell us what motivated Amazon to collaborate with Nova, and kind of what were your workforce needs, and how did you think Nova could fulfill those?
Yeah, Steve really touched upon this. One of the things that we, as an industry partner, that we look for with educational institutions is the opportunity of how they are configured to really reach back and to reach ahead. And so one of the beautiful things about Nova is that Nova has very deep partnerships and relationships on the K-12 side. They also have a very strong relationship with a 4-year institution, George Mason University. And the other third leg to that stool is Nova understands how to engage industry partners. They understand their business community. They already have relationships in place that allow them to clearly and accurately understand what are the labor market demands for the region. And coupled with all of that is that Nova is willing to move fast. So as you heard in Steve's response of standing up a program in 6 weeks, that's unheard of. I was laughing with Ken just a moment ago that on average, it takes 18 to 24 months to stand up an academic program at a community college, at a minimum. At Amazon, one of our leadership principles is bias for action. And so for us, Nova exemplified these important ingredients that we know it's supported by research, but that we also know really is the right environment to foster technical talent development. And so for us, Nova possessed all of those necessary components to help us to address our workforce demands. Nova and Steve and his team has done some of this research, so by all means correct me. But on average, there's roughly a demand for roughly 60 to 70,000 middle skilled to high skilled technical talent roles in this region. With that kind of demand, also with HQ2 coming into the area, we needed to identify an educational partner that stood ready to help us to develop technical talent. And for us, also based off research, and I imagine Molly's going to touch upon this, we knew that new entries into the labor market were not going to be sufficient to address this demand. And so Nova, in their willingness to support military as a talent pipeline, to support new entrees that are coming out of high schools as a technical pipeline, but then also to be willing to support other enterprises that are looking to upskill their talent. So how do we prepare existing talent that possess the will and the mindset to upskill and to learn new technical competencies and capabilities? And so Nova exemplified all of those things in light of those workforce demands that we have with AWS.
Thank you.
Of course.
So Kenneth, I'm going to turn to you because I know you and your institution do a lot of employer engagement in New York City. Tell us a little bit more about your work and how you all coordinate these activities in such a big city like New York.
Lauren, this was going great till Shanique and Steve had to bring up Amazon HQ2.
Yeah.
Why did you have to?
I'm
Such
sorry.
nice people.
Cuts to the heart, I know.
You sat me on the far extreme over here. I think a key to sort of a lasting and effective employer partnership is understanding what's the problem the employer has that we can solve.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for opportunities when an employer has a pinch point around recruitment or training or some kind. There's something where we can leverage Bronx Community College's unique, and we can't do everything, but our instructional capacity and our programs, our faculty, to fix something for an employer partner. Because I don't want their help when, we need them. We certainly have all kinds of needs, right?
Right.
Need employer partners to help faculty, better align their curriculum. Always need spots for mentoring or internships, and certainly jobs. I oversee career services. We're always looking for that. But I don't want an employer partner that's based on their perceived act of charity or something. No, that's not.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. It's not. No, I want to understand. What's that new New York State Department of Labor regulation they have to comply with, or licensing requirement that they can't quite figure out how to find candidates to satisfy. And we do a lot of work in early childhood education, for example, and folks may be familiar with CDA, Child Development Associate. So this is a credential that's nationally recognized, required in many states now for early child care centers and daycare providers. So we have programs in New York City, New York State that are, and the good thing, right, really ramping up pre-K public education, right, universal pre-K programs, and a whole lot of child care and daycare centers, and everybody now requiring people to have this credential. So while not often a fan of big government regulation, right, I'm like, hey, that's a good one, because it's creating a challenge for those employers, and we can satisfy it because folks in our education department have some really good programs to address that. There are other, so answer number one is like looking for those situations where an employer has a problem we may be able to help them address. And then in exchange over time, extracting those things that we do need, like that faculty interaction, those opportunities for our students. I'm thinking of another one, which we were talking about a little bit over lunch. Just a second example, and then I'll stop. But, Bronx Community College is, you guessed it, in the Bronx. We have about 10,000 students. We have the lowest completion rate in the CUNY system of the 7 community colleges in the system at about 20%. We have a lot of challenges. Our students have a lot of challenges. Our students are very poor. Many work, obviously. I mean, they're not so different from other community college students around the country, but we have a concentration of poverty and a concentration of poor academic preparedness in the Bronx. Very low educational attainment levels Bronx residents have, and very, again, inadequate preparation for college level work for New York City high school graduates in the Bronx, right? So, virtually all of our students qualify for TAP and Pell. Almost all of our students need some type of remediation before they can take credit-bearing courses. And so you look at the challenges of the concentration of poverty, poor academic preparedness, and that's, driving some of, or causing some of the low completion rates and the problems you can imagine or you're familiar with. On the other hand, our students are 98% students of color. And their employers in a variety of sectors, I'll just be sort of, very candid about this, who are, we're doing this in advertising and marketing to some degree in IT, banking and finance, who always sort of say they want diversity in their workforce, like they say it. And I'm like, well, okay, well, come talk to me. And a union leader I brought to campus, whose union has a particular problem with diversity in New York City, all I did was walk him around, but I did it on a nice spring day during club hours, which in CUNY is 2 to 4, there are no classes, so the campus is full of people walking around. I just walked him around. And on the way to the parking lot, and his union has a very serious diversity problem, like sanctioned by the state attorney general for it. He asked me for resumes for students from one of our programs. And so that's driven us to look and to speak directly to this issue of, wait, our student body may have economic disadvantages, and yes, they may have to overcome some educational hurdles. But if you're serious about diversifying your workforce in certain sectors, that's a problem we can solve. So it's about understanding that we've got to do something for them, and then over time, that partner, we hope we can extract things that will be beneficial to our students.
That's great. Yeah, diversity and inclusion is an important conversation in the workforce today. So thanks for bringing that up. So Molly, it would be great, just based on your research, could you talk a little bit about the ways community colleges can develop these strong relationships, and what are some of the ways that employers and community colleges collaborate?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from the conversations we had with the 41 employers that we spoke to, they very much echo many of the themes that you all have talked about. Number one is meeting employers physically where they are, right? And so, to hear that there was already an opportunity to be interacting with employers at other tables, right? At other community groups or initiatives that are going on, right? And then a lot of those happen actually at a very high level with business CEOs, right? And, college deans or, people at the community college that have particular stature, right? So that's definitely really important to be present in all those sort of networking spaces, the spaces that employers also feel that are their own, to have opportunities to have those relationships, get to know each other, kind of court each other, feel each other out a little bit, and learn mutually about both business needs as well as some of the great things that are happening at local community colleges. There's also meeting people literally at their place of business. If you've been studying the market and you know who the players are that align with some of the programs that you are doing, taking that extra step and making an appointment, even if it's sort of a cold call, right? To, go in and meet people where they are. The second thing is, providing those very low lift or very low burden opportunities to engage, right? Invite someone to an event. This isn't an ask, this isn't a big commitment. It's like, we would value your presence here and we're really interested in learning about you and we want you to know what's going on here, right? Being okay with doing some of that just get to know you sort of conversation first that sets you up for a more intensive relationship. And, while there were definitely some cases where you had these really strong bilateral relationships between colleges and individual businesses, a lot of the employers that we saw were actually on the smaller end of the business scale, and they were involved in more sectoral efforts, right? Where you may not have had this intensive tailoring to a particular program, but there's still very strong relationships, thinking about a larger pipeline for the sector.
Yep. Thanks, Molly. Just to let's build a little bit on what you're talking about here and that kind of initial approach to that a college might do to an employer or a group of employers, because we see many community colleges engage employers through their advisory boards, and that is a get to know you kind of thing, but maybe they only meet a few times a year and it's more of a touch base. I'm going to start with you, Kenneth. So how can community colleges engage employers beyond these advisory boards? And what are some effective approaches? We mentioned one, just of bringing an employer on campus with a particular need. And just who at the colleges is involved in building these kinds of relationships?
Just on that last part of your question, Lauren, it is helpful to have people on the campus, like me or Steve, I imagine, intermediaries that have the time in their days to get off campus and go do the things that Molly's talking about and do that outreach. Faculty really need these relationships, but the faculty I work with are so pressed for time, and a lot of their job is, well, it's teaching, it's compliance, it's all this other stuff, and they would love to get out and spend time with employers where they can't. So first, we need people like Steve, I won't use myself as an example, that can get out there and work with Amazon and bring all of that back, that relationship that Shanika has and those resources back to Nova. So you got to have the right people as those intermediaries. Another thing I said, we work hard to build trust and credibility. When we get that relationship going, for example, in career services, we're very careful about BCC students when we say, yeah, we're gonna set you up for an interview for this particular internship with an employer partner. Like, that's not for everybody. We have a thing called the Good to Go checklist, and our career services staff has to literally go through a series of activities, what the students do, and approve a student to be at a level to be a representative of Bronx Community College. So we have students walk in our door every day, and my office is where career services is, who think we can just send them out on an interview. We're like, no. You are essential. You've got to put your best foot forward, represent BCC, because that employer relationship is not about you. It's about all the students coming behind you. So you can't mess this up. So one of the things we're doing there is really two things, and this is about building trust and credibility with the employer partner, right? We're doing a lot of the painful kind of screening. recruiting and screening that they're happy to have us do, because they don't want the random BCC student. And if we're rigorous in our recruitment and our screening for a program, it's just going to be more successful for our student, obviously, but it's a much better service to that employer. And over time, again, we want to build that trust and credibility.
And are you doing some of the work readiness workshops and like getting people
Absolutely.
up to a place?
Yeah, no, we do. I mean, it's hard, and I'm sure Steve and other schools have the same constraint. So if we have 10,000 students, as I mentioned, and another 3,000 non-credit kind of continuing ed students and 4 career service people, right? Yeah. So we have to do a lot of this in self-administered online tools, and thankfully there are a lot of good tools out there for it, and a lot of group stuff, you know, and webinars and workshops and so on. But in the end, you have to, if you're a BCC student and you want that job or internship, you want to get that interview, you've got to have a session one-on-one with a career services expert who's going to deem you good to go on that little checklist thing. Mock interviews, all that stuff, or not, you know, send you back for another workshop and so on.
If I could make a point off of Ken's point, the idea of screening the student, NOVA, one of the things about what NOVA has challenged us to do as an industry partner is to say, hey, look, we need you all to signal for us, what does the student have to demonstrate back to you that they are job ready? So we need you to be invested to give us an understanding of what exactly does the student need to demonstrate, part one. Part two is, hey, I need you all to take a look at your basic qualifications that are declaring that a student needs a 4-year degree. And so what can you, as an industry partner that's on the front lines, that's leading in a lot of ways, what can you do to help challenge broader enterprise industry partners to think about their basic qualifications when we think about a community college student? And so to Ken's point, our mission is to accelerate the development of a diverse technical talent pool. The way that we do that is we have to have a deep understanding of what does ready mean to Amazon or to JP Morgan Chase or to Enterprise X, right? And so one of the things that NOVA challenged us to do was to put some skin in the game. And so through our conversations and with their leadership, and again, with NOVA's investment with military, with K-12, with working professionals, they challenged us and we were able to stand up an initiative called the Interviewer Accelerator. And what that program is that any student that completes the NOVA program gets a guaranteed touch point with a recruiter, either with Amazon or with an Amazon partner. And so that's an initiative that came as a result of NOVA challenging us to examine our gates around job readiness. And so I think that's an important thing to call out, is that community colleges also, in particular the leadership, play an important role of pushing back at industry and saying, hey, look, we're trying to be responsive, we're adapting our programs, we have a diverse talent pool. Now, what can you do to ensure that if we do what you ask, our students are going to get a fair shake? And those are the things that we're trying to work in partnership, not just with NOVA, but really globally. We have many partnerships but NOVA really is a trailblazer and they're leading the way for us. But this is what we're doing in conjunction with community colleges, is to really examine policies, but also this idea of who's job ready.
So I think, Steve, maybe you could build on this a little bit, because I think, how did you talked a little bit about the initial steps in this partnership with Amazon, but how did you really build this trust? Kind of who was involved, and how did you really get that going?
Yeah, for us, I mean, it started at the highest levels. We brought at the time our president, Dr. Rawls, early on to get the institutions buy-in, because as we went down this road, you know, we were going to need a lot of resources. That the part of the college that can be nimble, the workforce division, is sort of the self-funded division. So you're hoping it pays off down the road, but you wanted some stopgap there to say, hey, this is important. And luckily they announced the HQ2 competition. So I tied everything back to, like, we don't want to drop the ball here and make it our fault that they didn't choose us. So we got a lot of support from the highest levels. 2, we assigned someone from our team to be the point of contact. And that was critical, because they got to know the players. Because Amazon, like anything else, and Amazon Web Services, they're a big organization. And there's lots of people coming at the problem from different angles. And sometimes the questions would come up and say, who do I talk to about this? And if you weren't working with them on a regular basis, you didn't know which person in the company you should direct that question to. And so they became our in-house expert on helping navigate the Amazon relationship. And so that was invaluable to have that committed person. But the biggest issue is we looked at the data before we ever said, even though I said yes early on, We needed to look at the data to make sure we weren't just building a single partnership. When we looked at the data, what Amazon was asking for was the same thing dozens of other companies were asking for. It wasn't unique to Amazon. And Amazon didn't want it to be. They early on said, I mean, Teresa Carlson has set up meetings for us with other companies saying, we've done this, we all have the same problem, you should, guys, that should work together. Our goal was to stand up what we did with Amazon with Apprenticeship with a dozen new companies in the tech field because everyone is challenged in the same way. And so that was early on, we, as part of the buy-in to our board and others of saying, this is not just about Amazon, this is about our region and us filling that skill gap.
Molly, Steve touches on a really important point that I recall from your work and the report you did about having a person at the college that can speak the industry language. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the other things in approaching relationships with employers that community colleges can do?
Sure. I mean, we saw a lot that in the initial ask, having those high-level relationships were really important. In the day-to-day, it is really important to have industry-savvy people who are regularly interacting with that business point of contact, right? And who also have some of the substantive knowledge that overlaps with what faculty are trying to teach, right? That is just invaluable. We even had some cases where there had been someone who had worked at a particular business who actually switched over and worked on faculty at the community college, right? So someone who had actually been on the floor and could collaborate with the plant manager or the other folks who are on the other side for the jobs that they're being trained for. So that's definitely a theme that we heard in terms of maintaining and sustaining relationships over time. That and this sort of sense of customer service, right? Just maintaining good communication. Now that communication can sort of ebb and flow depending on the stage of development that you're in with your program that you're developing. Initially, there's a lot of activity with the design and the tweaking of the model and making sure that everything is working well. Kind of may decrease over time in a sort of a natural way when things are up and running. But being able to tailor that, knowing who to talk to about what, and being responsive to businesses' needs for communication about different aspects of the programs that you're developing.
I will say, though, that it never ends. I think the traditional academic model is you build something and you're good for 5 years. You don't have to tweak it much. Especially in the tech industry and with these partnerships and learning from Amazon is every cohort we do of apprenticeship, every time we put in new classes, the industry is moving so quickly that we are constantly, I'd like to think we can get to a point where, all right, we did it, for the next year we're good, but it never works out that way. And so having the time, because I think our models, the way we set it up in higher ed is often a lot of upfront work, and then you're on to the next project and let this one coast. It doesn't work in a lot of industries nowadays. It's too constant. So you have to be resourced effectively to keep these industry partnerships working because it is a constant change cycle that you have to deal with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So let's continue down this path because I really do want to hear from you. After you're building these initial relationships, the program, successfully maintaining the relationships as well as just helping them grow over time, especially if there's in a high demand kind of industry like IT right now, but we've got healthcare, we've got all kinds of manufacturing. How do you help them grow, and then just how do the partnerships change over time?
You're looking at me.
I am. Well, we can. Anybody can answer.
Well, I'll jump.
Sure.
I'll jump in because it's a continuation of my earlier theme of, identifying that employer's challenge and create a program that addresses it, and then doing that careful screen. Making sure our students really are the students. As Shaniqua explains it, are going to fit and be right, and doing that screening up front. So the next thing, and maintaining it, is providing behind the scenes all the support so the student's successful over the long haul in the assignment. Again, talking about it if it's an internship or if it's even paid employment. And so, for example, just a quick little story. We have a pretty unique program at Bronx Community College, training recovery peers. Right, the Bronx has a very high, the highest in the city, rate of opioid-related overdose addiction. Sorry, I said that backwards, but you know what I'm talking about. Opioid-related deaths. And so we created this. It's actually funded by HRSA. this program to train people with lived experience in addiction and recovery to be recovery peers. And this was enabled by New York State Medicaid, a change in the Medicaid law in New York State that made that a recovery peer, which is a very entry-level kind of recovery, it's the lowest level recovery coach, is now reimbursable for providers under New York State Medicaid. So we saw an opening there, an opportunity. And we began the training program, and there is a state credential for it, obviously, and these employers require it. But part of it is very long, like 200 hours of an internship at a provider. So we have 26 provider partners, and those relationships are vital. So we are serving their need because we're doing the recruiting and the screening and the training of the peers. A lot of our peers, our average age is 38, many are formerly incarcerated, almost all. The lived experience with addiction and recovery is in many cases their own. And so talk about a program where we have to be very careful in terms of screening students, that they're ready to take on this work, working with someone who's going through his or her own recovery. It's very tricky. But the point there is that to make it work, there's this ongoing need for student support. So the students in the program in these internships are always in our office. I'm like, aren't you supposed to be working? No, they're always with our staff because they need a lot of support on all kinds of things. They are very poor, many of them, so they could be homeless. But if we left that to the employer partner, that's just too much of a burden to the employer that's agreed to take them in these internships, these 26 healthcare providers in the Bronx and around the city. So the answer here for us anyway, that next step is, you create that partnership and you got to figure out by whatever means, how do we provide the ongoing support to ensure a successful student experience for the student, of course, but also to maintain the trust, and the positive employer relationship.
Shanika alluded to this, the K-12 piece for us, because a lot of the challenge of the tech industry, and we focus on tech because if you look at the number of openings in the Northern Virginia area, that's by like a factor of 10 larger than the next highest one. And so we have a pain point of we just have not enough kids interested in the field. It's not we can't train them, it's just they just don't raise their hand to be trained. So we took the next step of saying, we need to take a bigger role in our K-12 system. And we, 2 days ago, launched a two-year initiative we've been working on called the Tech Pathways Program in 120 middle schools and high schools across our region in all 9 districts. So we kind of realized the industry's pain was we need more people, we need them at scale. And so we took ownership of that, which is not our job. It doesn't say anything in the community college system. We train people, but to go do career awareness in high schools for parents and kids, and to push it down to middle school, and our local elected officials want us to push it down earlier, we brought industry to the table and said, would this be important to you? And the industry overwhelmingly said, yes, how can we help? But that put us in that position of saying, listen, we're going to be very serious partners in this. We're going outside our comfort zone. We're going outside our mandate to really, as a region, in Northern Virginia, it's a little weird. There's a lot of jurisdictions, so there really isn't a center of gravity. And so we decided to make the community college the center of gravity for career awareness in our region. So that, take it to the next level, brought more employers to the table than we previously had. And it strengthened our relationship, I think, with Amazon and others because they said, wow, they're serious about this, that they're really going down that road. And again, building up our higher ed partners as well. We all know stackability, we've talked about a long time. We struggled with that because we had the non-credit world of all these industry credentials. Our students would come in, get 3 or 4 through an apprenticeship. Some of them didn't have degrees, and we'd go turn around and say, could they get prior learning credit for this? And for quite a while, they kept saying, no, it doesn't fit. Well, we kept pounding hard enough and kept saying, companies are getting smarter about this. They're not going to pay for the training 3 or 4 times for the same pathway. And so we were finally able to, a few months ago, establish 9 different of the industry credentials based on the Amazon apprenticeship that are prior learning credit. And now we're getting ready to get with the senior partner and hopefully announce later this fall a new senior partnership. So we're getting very close to be able to say you can get these credentials in high school, Perkins can pay for it, move through and get people to the workforce faster. So it's really taken more of a macro view of workforce development and really owning it from cradle to grave.
If I could chime in on the notion of the sustaining and maintaining the partnership between the educational institution and industry, starting with, of course, you need buy-in at the top for sure. But secondly, you need the buy-in of the faculty. And so NOVA, again, did a wonderful job of finding early adopters and getting champions within their faculty corps who then could begin to become evangelists for the work, because it's going to be hard work. Because we're now asking faculty to modernize, revise curriculum, upskill themselves, which requires an investment on their part. So you need the buy-in of the faculty as well. The other thing is the ability to communicate early wins. You need quick wins to communicate that and communicate that loudly and often. so that you can get the enrollment and the subscribership from your students to garner that enrollment and that interest so that they then can enroll and then persist through the learning. And as I mentioned earlier, Nova pushed at the business community and said, hey, look, the proof is going to be in the pudding. We now need your support around placing our students in these jobs so that our students, and we can communicate back to the broader community, back to our board, that look, we're having impact, we're making impact, and we're accelerating how quickly we're training and developing medium skill and high skill talent to step into these jobs. So it takes all of those components. And one of the things that worked really well, again, their former president, Scott Rawls, amazing, but one of their board members, Todd, was an actual student of the program. So he's an actual student of the actual cloud computing program. So he's going back to the board and an amazing evangelist. Like, if I could write a script, that's what I would want. The president, a board member, get the students, get the buy-in from the business community with jobs, voila.
And she brings up a good point. The faculty was always, the way we were structured made it a little difficult sometimes to get buy-in. And about a year ago, we created a new provost role. We call him our cloud provost, but it's Dr. Chad Knight, and he's been really great at kind of roping it all together to really make sure it really is stackable. So that was a key component of making this successful.
That's great. Shanique, I'm going to actually turn back to you because I think this point is really important, and I think we all try to think about this. How do employers measure success in these kinds of partnerships? What do you value? What are you capturing for your own, reasons to keep partnerships alive, or maybe scale back on some?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. And I will say, we're still in what we would say day one of this partnership and this relationship. But the metrics of success that we pay attention to on the early days is really around the buy-in and the investment from the top all the way through the community of the community college. Are faculty engaged? What are we hearing from students in terms of the institution's ability to tell us, hey, look, we have 300 students that stand ready, that meet the bar to step into this program. So those are some of the early metrics that we're looking for, is the buy-in and the support of the student community. As we persist through this, we have milestones within the NOVA program where they've baked in industry certification. So there's an AWS certification that's a milestone as part of this 2-year program offering. We're looking to see how many of the students are able to meet that bar and pass that certification. That certification in of itself will garner the opportunity to have a touch point with an employer, to have an AWS certification. So that is an important milestone that's baked into the program that serves as a marker for us that the program is delivering on its goal, right? And then finally, it's really this idea of getting the job. Is the student, once they persist, making a choice to stand to interview and gain a technical career? Because this is what we're finding, and we've been looking at some of this workforce data globally, is that you can move individuals through technical training and get technical certifications, but then they're not making choices to go into technical jobs. Why is that? What we're finding, and when you look at some of the research, it's that there's other inputs besides technical knowledge that a candidate needs. They need a supportive environment. They may need a coach or a mentor. They may need some additional supports around how do you effectively interview, the soft skills, how are you communicating effectively, how do you demonstrate that you understand how to work in a team. And so these are some of the aspects that NOVA has now come back to us to say, hey, look, we need to examine some of the behavioral competencies that we may need to investigate and bake back into our program, because we're finding through early markers, through these metrics of success, that our students still need something beyond a certification or beyond the technical skills. So those are some of the metrics of success that we pay attention to. We want to make sure that everyone is equally invested as we're trying to accelerate the development of talent. And ultimately for us, we want to get students in the jobs faster than a 2-year. Like, if we could move to competency-based learning, that would be terrific.
Yes.
Do you guys want to build on, or Kenneth and Steve, what are you all measuring or capturing in terms of the success of these partnerships? What matters to your institution, and how are you thinking about it?
Well, a quick example, the answer before is very important that the employer defines success. So you have that conversation at the on day one, and expectations are really clear, and and you got to dig because they don't always tell you, so you got to push a little harder. No, really, the perfect result here for these students working with your company is what? Like, push them. So we had an experience with a bank. I wasn't going to name them, but it's J.P. Morgan Chase. A great experience. This summer, we did a recruitment and prep kind of program for students to become part-time bank tellers at J.P. Morgan Chase branches in the Bronx. 20 hours of work in a branch each week, combined with your schedule as you're finishing up your associate's degree. And that's the HR folks at Chase were great about this. And I kept saying, because I got pushback from the department, our business department loved the program, but this is a bank teller. Why do they call it a bank teller? Because they thought it wouldn't be attractive to students. I'm like, it's a job at J.P. Morgan Chase. It's a gateway. It's basically customer service, right? It's a great job. It's fine. So we got over that. But what was so important, Lauren, was that from day one, Caitlin, the HR person who we designed the program with, was really specific about their metrics of success, right? And she'd use these lines. Pardon me, I'm not trying to. Chase is great, but she said, we have an obsession with customer service. I'm like, well, everybody does. So, you got to tell me more, Caitlin. Like that, I can't tell my BCC student that what does that mean? What are you looking for? And so when you push your employer partner nicely to be really specific about the outcomes they're seeking, what success is, and you do that at the beginning, you're just getting off to a good start. And in this case, by early August, the students had to go for two different interviews at J.P. Morgan Chase. 14 out of 16 were offered jobs, right? And the one of the students couldn't just because of his school schedule. He'll get a job in June. So Caitlin was really happy. We're doing the program again in our winter session, but because there was just this really crystal clear definition of success from day one by the employer.
Yeah. And this kind of goes maybe back to you, Steve, in terms of your relationship with Shanika and the Amazon team. Were you aware of these metrics for success as you were launching things? Did it offer clarity to you in terms of what you needed to do to be successful?
We knew upfront what their goals were, but we also knew it was a moving target.
Okay.
Because as we went through the program, like I said, after the first cohort, we were kind of like, what could we do better on the next one? If there's a next one. We weren't even sure after the first one. 90% of the jobs that are advertised in Northern Virginia IT say they need a bachelor's degree. So when you look at that bar already, when I say was the program successful, 2 years in retrospect, yes, obviously they're working with us. We keep working together on new ideas. But the success, I think, for the program for us was more employers are calling us because they see Amazon finding talent that they overlooked. They're now seeing people that they said because we do 16,000 degrees in the greater Washington area, in IT alone every year. Wow. Associate, bachelor's, master's, PhDs. And that is a drop in the bucket of what's needed. So everyone's at the pipeline end waiting. Yeah. And some have been creative. They say, well, we'll go to Nova and we'll offer some job shadowing for a sophomore, and maybe they'll like us when they're done in 2 more years, but they're still waiting for the end. Where Amazon kind of turned it on its head and said, we're going to hire people without a degree, put them through this program, and then we'll pay to get them the degree if they start growing the company. Because the leadership will say, you don't need a degree in the first job. You will if you're going to grow with the business, and you have to understand the strategy of the company. As they grow, they're going to need that higher levels of education. But in day one, you don't. Yeah. And so I think for us, it was successful because of helping us break that mindset of a lot of other employers. And the general public loves it. I mean, when we launched this partnership, we have tracked over 100 calls. I mean, this is not an inexpensive program. Amazon pays the rate, but they're sitting in a classroom being paid by Amazon for up to 12 weeks. Yeah. I had people say, I don't care what it costs, I'll pay. Yeah. Your enrollment's been flat at community college. You're thinking, huh? But no, we're like, you have to be hired first. But we went to employers and said, people are desperate to understand a pathway into tech jobs. Because everyone hears they're great jobs, but no one knows how to get there. Because it's not always clear. Just go get a computer science degree doesn't really answer it for a lot of people who may have an aversion to math or something. So I think we always knew what the metrics were for the individual program, but why we did it and the metrics, we kind of have realized they're much bigger than we anticipated for the institution.
Yeah, that's great. Molly, in talking to the employers that you did, as I recall, there weren't a lot of them counting the beans in terms of what their return on investment was, or counting, doing the accounting, I guess, for what the partnership had yielded so far. So can you tell, are there other things that maybe employers valued or thought in terms of success for the partnerships that they valued?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the employer partners with whom we spoke intuitively felt that they were getting really good value out of the collaboration, right? Anything from building the pipeline, right, like you were talking about. A lot of small businesses, they're not going to be having a lot of new hires per year, right? They don't have that demand, but they're concerned about having a larger, strong sector of talent, or a group of talent in their sector to support their future growth. They have, talk about hires, they talk about time to train up, right, and get people up to speed. They talk about just getting a better fit, right, that would improve their retention overall. And there were some employers that had some human resources metrics, but in general really weren't doing that. And in some ways it's sort of an opportunity, right, because we know that there are a lot of really highly motivated employers that are coming and knocking on community colleges' doors, or ones that are more sort of civically minded. A lot of them were, actually. They had both business interests and sort of an interest in, having a relationship with their community college because they're from the community, right? But when it comes to making the case to other employers that might be more on the fence, it might be really helpful to have some of those metrics to show. And so there's sort of a question for all of these really promising relationships that you have. Is there a way that you can maybe build that in so that you can, have those sort of hard stats for people who are going to be, competing for airspace with the operations people in their business that have, every I dotted and T crossed when they're talking about competing investments for business. So interesting opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. So in a few minutes, we are going to turn to the audience for Q&A. And so audience members, start to think about your questions. Also, feel free to be tweeting with the hashtag #LiveAtUrban, as well as using the handles of our panelists here. But before we do that, I just want to ask another question or two. And maybe just because we're here in DC, and I see some federal friends in the audience, and some folks that are really interested on the policy side of supporting community colleges and employers coming together to really improve the skills of workers and really meet employer needs. So just, how can government, federal, state, local, support stronger community college partnerships through policy, through initiatives? What comes to mind for you all?
Shall I jump in? No
Why
one's
not?
jumping in.
I'm staring at you, so.
Because we're here, workforce Pell.
Yeah.
And it really, more broadly speaking, financial aid reforms, so that low-income students aren't forced to do unpaid internships that are required for completing an AAS degree in CUNY. I mean, it's wrong. Yeah. Work study, federal work study, that just makes it easier for there to be the effect of a wage subsidy for an internship program. And other, this is state programs, state financial aid programs like TACP in New York State should follow on too. But why this matters, I think, for the employer relationship, Shanika's got to speak to this more than I can, but my sense is that as more and more as employers want us to equip students, including degree-seeking students, with industry credentials, the training to take those exams for those certifications is done in our continuing ed division, right? And there's a fee for that. Well, financial aid's not paying for that now. You got the testing fee, the enrollment fee, and of course instructional costs. So there's a fee for those programs, and those credentials really matter. And when you have 80% of your students leaving the school without a 60-credit associate's degree, well, it would be a consolation, right, if they could leave with some credential that had been baked into their degree. So while they might not have the associate's degree, they do have that CCNA or that A+ or that CDA I mentioned for early childhood education, so they can get a job and then maybe get their financial house in order and maybe someday come back to school and work toward the degree. I mean, that's what stackability and kind of right? Opportunities for students that are not just limited to like we do in CUNY. Hi, welcome to Bronx Community College. Success is a 60-credit associate's degree. Even though we know only at best 20% of you will get it, and less than half of those of you will get it will go on in CUNY and get a bachelor's degree. So when we know that's the reality, how can we not give students a chance to get other credentials recognized by Amazon and by other employers along the way? Well, they can't pay for it, even if we had it. So a solution, it's not perfect, but there are ways to, obviously it's being discussed here, part-time or workforce Pell, Pell for short-term industry credentials under a certain set of requirements is one such answer, as are other reforms to financial aid and federal work study.
Yeah, I'll echo short-term Pell. Luckily, Virginia has a workaround with our Fast Forward program, which allows the buy down of these high demand credentials. So the student only pays up to 1/3 of what a cost would be, including the exam fees. So it does get people prepared for these industry exams. Another thing I think is critical, is sort of a disconnect that we have, and it's very apparent here in the greater Washington area, is federal contractors struggle to find people because often these contracts are written to require, now I've dealt with the procurement folks that say, well, it doesn't require a bachelor's degree, but the perverse incentive on how you compensate an employer that says you're paid more for someone touching this contract that has a bachelor's degree versus someone that they know could do it with an associate or a combination of credentials. So it's almost like the procurement and what's happening on the contracting side is very different than what you hear from labor or the White House and others sometimes about we need to break the mold and we need to look beyond the bachelor's degree. So I think there needs to be some alignment in federal procurement on how they get these contracts to open up the doors back to a competency-based system. I think that's the way you do it, is start to get folks that you're hiring based on their competencies, not just that they have a piece of paper that says they have a degree. And of course, again, for this area, rationalizing the security clearance issue. Many of our businesses are struggling to fill people. So, I mean, if there's some creative ways that universities and post-secondary institutions like Nova and others can start that process while they're enrolled in programs, working with employers, maybe not paid as an intern, because sometimes sitting them on a desk for 2 years while they work with their security clearance is expensive. But are there ways that we can creatively solve a problem without having to reinvent the wheel?
Can I throw in another?
Sure.
Just because we're here. EITC. Enhanced EIT, Earned Income Tax Credit benefits for single childless men, for example. Sort of disparity in community colleges, male, female, and the need for us to have those supports. And EITC is a very good mechanism, right? And but it's not. It's obviously scaled to people with children, and we have students who would benefit from it. And in that category of benefits, we have to also be careful with work requirements on SNAP and the hours required, just because, again, people trying to get their schedules together. You don't want someone to take that paid internship and either have a benefits cliff issue because now their income is over a poverty threshold. You don't want them to, they can't really do an unpaid internship with a for-profit employer, but if it's in the field of study, that's the most valuable internship they'll ever get. But if they're getting paid and that causes a problem with their public assistance, that's an issue, whether it's food stamps or other forms of public assistance. It shouldn't be so hard to fix that. But I guess it is.
Well, let's turn to the audience here. We'd love to hear some of your questions. Right. And if you would just say who you are and ask your question.
Okay, Keela Washington. I work as a research analyst in the Center for Education, Data, and Policy at Urban. And I've really enjoyed hearing your perspectives and your experiences making partnerships between business and community colleges work for students. I would love to hear about any experiences, maybe Shanika or Molly can speak to this, of working within rural environments and creating those partnerships as well, because it's definitely a different industry, different challenges for those students in those community colleges.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we in fact have partnerships in place like Montana, where we start is really beginning to understand the labor market of that region. Also understanding the priorities of that region from the governor's office or the mayor or the governor or local leaders to understand what are the types of businesses that they're attempting to try to draw in. We have partnerships for example, like in Kentucky. And so by us understanding what their priorities are, what the labor market demand is, what's the opportunity of virtual technical job opportunities, and then through that begin to work through their educational system, their community college network system, to try to stand up programming that will facilitate against those priorities and or a virtual training opportunity. So for us, we start with the labor market data. We start also with the priorities of that state or that region, and then help them to stand up a program that would make the most sense for that particular region. There are other regions, for example, where data centers are, where we have stood up community programs and educational programs to invest back into the community to help them to understand what is a data center, what are the job opportunities connected to a data center or a fulfillment center. But also, how do the jobs that are currently in those two types of sectors, what are the skilled genomes, if you will, that allow a person that starts in a fulfillment center to pivot into a more technical track? So we help to make the invisible, we open up or create transparency around what are the skills that create career ladders connected to those particular jobs, in particular when we think about rural communities. We do that broadly, but in particular around rural communities. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking too that we had several strong community college and employer partnerships in rural areas, and sometimes those employers are the ones that feel their pain points most acutely because they maybe have fewer people to choose from, or people have to travel longer distances. I remember one employer particularly in Alaska was not only providing work-based learning in collaboration with community college, they were actually paying for a bus to take people all the way out to their facility on a regular basis so that people could participate, right? Because I know transportation is a huge issue in some of those places. It's not just getting the class environment, but being able to engage on site with the employer, takes that literally the extra mile from everyone involved.
One other point that just came to mind as well is helping community colleges and workforce development and kind of the leadership of these areas to understand entrepreneurship opportunities as well. So that's an important kind of thread to the work that we do as well, is helping to expose the opportunity around entrepreneurship and how the technology can enable some of that based off of, again, the priorities and the opportunities of that particular region. And that's an important area as well as when we think about rural.
Questions? Right there.
Hi, I'm Carol DeFries. I'm with the Community College of Philadelphia. My question is a little bit of inside baseball and understanding. You mentioned that there needed to be an investment, Stephen, on the college's part up front. Just thinking a little bit about the infrastructure that you had to pull together to create that program, and maybe also the JP Morgan Chase program. Like, how did you structure it? And is it non-credit to credit? Talk a little about, for those of us who are from community colleges, about that.
Yeah, our program, the apprenticeship program is all non-credit. And that was the ability for us to move quickly and do it within the time frame. It's a 40-hour-week program ranging between 9 and 12 weeks, depending on the apprenticeship type. And that initial investment dealt a lot with staff. I mean, when you think about the non-credit training that most of the colleges have, it's usually you have a lot of adjunct faculty. Well, that adjunct faculty is not available 40 hours a week. So we had to invest in full-time faculty in the non-credit world, which was very different play for us because we had to hire full-time people and we had to upskill and have some staff to support and help these folks. So we were making a big gamut that, again, it wasn't just for Amazon, this was for the whole tech community, but we knew that if this didn't work out, we had just made a big bet that didn't pan out. Yeah. So I got my president to say yes.
The project I described was small and didn't really have any special costs. I think the advancement office would have wanted me to chase down the people from JP Morgan, shake them down for money, but I didn't. No, we were just really, it was the first time we're doing it, as I said, and it went really well, and so staff did it internally. There was no outside cost for that. The goal was recruit, screen, prepare, and support this cohort of students and have a great success in terms of Chase's desired outcomes, and that has happened. The other two programs, on credit to non-credit, The recovery peer training program is a stackable credential. So those students I described, many of whom never thought they'd be on a college campus, earn up to 9 BCC credits towards a public health degree, an associate's degree in public health. And the CDA, the Child Development Associate program, is also 6 to 9 credits toward an associate degree in early childhood education. And in both of those instances, the chairs of the respective departments were terrific. We talk about faculty and engagement, were fantastic partners. But again, it's because I think I early on perceived, you know, I said, well, what's their pinch point, right? And in an I don't know how it is in Philadelphia, but in CUNY, AAS degree programs in community colleges require an advisory board of sort of business partners and require internships. But when I looked around, I realized the faculty had little time and resources and context to maintain that, and they were kind of sketchy. It wasn't like, people weren't, you know, being criticized over, but you could tell they weren't satisfied. So I sort of, again, as the intermediary, said, wait, what if I could help you, you know, get some new partners, strengthen those advisory boards, and have relationships with employers to help keep that curriculum a little more in alignment with what they need, and also ideally provide more opportunities for students. So in understanding the faculty challenge and their constraints on their time and resources, it was sort of like the mirror of understanding the employer challenge and being there in the middle saying, how can we, you know, solve both sets of problems as best as we can and have something that's sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of sustainability, one thing that was really interesting that we saw, you know, very few employers were financially contributing to the programs themselves, but not necessarily because others didn't want to. One of the things that was very interesting was that it was like a 5-year grant. How long was TACT? 4 years, right? A lot of the employers didn't really know what the plan for sustainability was. They were very happy with their relationships. They wanted to continue them, but they weren't necessarily included in the conversation about sustainability, right? And many of them expressed, you know, interest in helping them do that, whether it be supporting grant applications or maybe putting some of their own money or skin in the game. So, you know, when you have these partnerships, it's an opportunity to make sure that folks understand that, yes, we're only able to do this because we have this really wonderful coordinator person who can help our faculty make all those connections and sustain this relationship. We have to be able to pay for that person. Right. Our grant money is going away. How do we do that, right? And include them in problem solving, because there are a lot of challenges to sustaining any new program, right? And when you have these great employer partners, they can help you with that. Back there.
Hi, I'm Dhruv. I went to community college. Do you expect that building employment opportunity programs into community colleges will increase graduation and completion rates for degrees? Because as we know, pursuing community college part-time and working part-time is one of the key factors for stop-out rates. So,
Yes. Yes. That's all I say, yes. I've been not pleasantly surprised, overwhelmed by the number of emails and things we've gotten back, as I mentioned earlier, just from the Amazon partnership, from the general public saying, how can I get into Amazon? Thinking that our programs are just open to the public, and they're not. But when we launched the cloud program, we've already grown that fairly quickly. Same with some of our cybersecurity programs, because they were connected to employers early on. I mean, the problem, I think, with higher ed, a lot of times we've gotten disconnected from the job. We just sort of, you know, you see, I've got high school kids, they're told they're going to college. It's not really about what you're going to do in college. You're going to college. You'll figure it out along the way. And then your senior year, you go to a career center at that college and say, what should I do with whatever I just got? I think what we're trying to change now is back to this guarantee. I would love, in the not too distant future, is you come in and every pathway you pick is guaranteed interviews with multiple companies when you're done. So the connection to the employer is very clear from day one. We've gotten away from that because somehow higher ed became something that it wasn't about jobs. It was about, you know, and I've had this debate with some of our faculty, it's about creating good citizens. We failed then. I mean, the current political climate, if that's what we got. How'd
that work out?
Yeah, so we need something new. It needs to be tied back to employers. And so I think having those dialogues up front is critical, and we need to let people know that these are the pathways to jobs. But they need to connect. Like AAS is sometimes people say, well, that's if you're not going to go get a bachelor's. But people sometimes say, well, later I want to grow and I want to get a bachelor's, and you want to start over. So we're trying to make all our AASs in appropriate areas like IT and others that they have a pathway beyond if you decide to keep going. So there's more of that coming, but I think that's what we have to focus on for the next decade.
And I want to say yes to your question also, and for a very similar reason. And our low-income students in the Bronx have little, if any, what I call career capital. They can't even envision a career. They're lost in many ways because they haven't had the chance to ever be in a place and see people or touch and feel and meet and talk to. They don't have the mentors. They don't have the contacts. This is not a discussion they're having at home, right, about working in Amazon, working in IT, working in healthcare in many, many, many cases. And so lacking that career capital, those building blocks of making decisions and doing your career planning and deciding what to major in and why and what I'm going to do after, what I'm going to do for the summer, they don't have that. And so these activities, the employer engagement can create so much career capital for students who need to make thoughtful decisions. Remember, they have you know this, I'm sure, but your financial aid is sorely limited, and it's hard. You make the wrong choice, you go off track and pursue the wrong major, you're out of luck, right? You don't get I always say that to well, I don't say it all the time, I'll say it here outside of BCC, but it's a problem when students leave and have financial aid problems. CUNY tuition is low, right? But if you've gone in the wrong direction, without having that career capital, without a thoughtful plan, we don't give you a refund. Like those 80% of our students that leave, they've burnt through their financial aid. We don't give it back to them. They can't go use it again, right? So early on, high school, et cetera, just what Steve's talking about, we've got to get students the opportunity to be able to think about jobs and careers. Not tell them what to do, but give them exposure to that.
And I think the deep connection with the business community is the right incentive. We know it's a sacrifice. We know what the average community college student is up against. And we have a responsibility to help that community college student understand, look, you invest this amount of time, this is what awaits you at the end, because we're going to sufficiently prepare you to step into that role. So that's a responsibility that we have as a business partner. So it's the right thing to do.
I'm Cheryl Martin. Oh, there's a mic for you.
Hi, Cheryl Martin with Department of Labor, manage the TAC grants and scaling apprenticeship now. So you started answering a question that I had, but I'm curious if you have more, which is, if we did this panel 5 years from now, I'll give you 5 years, not 6 weeks. What would
He'll sign up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. What would success look like then that, right now, is just sort of on the edge of what we want? And I hear you say some things like, there would be these guaranteed interviews at the end of this and whatever. But are there other things that you've seen that are kind of intriguing that, would be like, ooh, this would be cool, and in 5 years we'd be able to say that's what success is?
We got this idea when we saw that first cohort from Amazon, that you were taking people that we had already said had succeeded on an academic track and put them into an apprenticeship program, which traditionally was, oh, you're not going to college, you're doing an apprenticeship. It's the other college degree. When the average high schooler will work for 50 plus years in the workforce. I see apprenticeship evolve into something as a reskilling tool that industry will start to take people from different skill sets and different industries and say, I was in the energy industry and now I'm making transition to a different sector and I'm going to put you in an apprenticeship program because we value all the life skills you bring. You already have a degree, but you need some on-the-job training, you need some credentialing. So I think we've talked about lifelong learning for a long time, but we didn't really know what it means, and people had figured it out. And we always were frustrated that no one ever went back to school or did the right things. I think apprenticeship could be that tool in 5, maybe 10 years, because I think the skill shortage is not going to just go away on its own. Even if we ever get into a recession, you look at some of the industries that are looking at pain points now, it can't fix itself, even if the economy slowed down. The people who had the skills are retiring. There's not enough people with the right skills behind them. So we are going to be seeing this for the generations forward, that we've got to look at different ways how we prepare people. Now, sticking them in the pipeline where right after high school you go get a college degree and you're set for the next 50 years is obsolete.
Success for us, from an industry vantage point, is diverse. We want a diverse workforce of individuals that feel that they are contributing in an impactful way using tools that are making a difference to solve problems that they care about. That's what we care about. We want diversity, and we want individuals to stay engaged in the workforce and to pivot. I need to see individuals that are going up and down a career ladder because they are invested in contributing in an impactful way, whether it's with Amazon, whether it's with JP Morgan Chase, whether it's with Nova. And so that's what success would look like for us, is a very diverse workforce that's highly engaged and interested in solving problems that matter to them.
So with that, we're going to have to end the panel. And if you would give a round of applause to this wonderful panel here. Thank you so much. And we have our next panel coming up right after this. It's creating meaningful work-based learning opportunities for community college students. And I welcome the panelists and Jennifer Worth from the American Association of Community Colleges up to the stage. Just before we start.
Faces in the audience. Great.
Okay.
When you're ready? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for being here. I want to do a quick thank you to JP Morgan Chase and to Urban Institute. It's a real pleasure to get to join you all today. I want to thank the previous panelists who gave us a really phenomenal starting point from which to transition. Everyone in the room, thanks for hanging in there for the second crew. Lots of friendly faces in the room, but equally so, all of you that are on the listening in, I've gotten lots of text messages, so thanks for being there. Continue to please tweet at #live@urban and make sure that you are preparing your questions, because we are going to do the exact same format. I'll start off a little bit and we'll go through some questions with the panel, but we want to hear from you and we want to get to you in your interests. This panel is just spectacular to get to work with. I think many of you know, but I'll just say it for fun. The American Association of Community Colleges is a membership organization. So we have over 1,000 members across the country, but colleges look different across the country. In some places, they are state-based, coordinated from a centralized point. In other places, they are very small and independent and rural. We have tribal land and territory institutions. But the panel that is before you today is actually a beautiful array of the strengths and the diversity that our community college structure possesses. So we have Ann Bacon, Director of Strategic Planning and Policy from the North Carolina Community Colleges. We have Rick Bouillon from Associate Vice President for Workforce and Economic Development at Salt Lake Community College. We have Hayden Springer, Workforce Development Manager from the Foundation for California Community Colleges, and we have Paul Thompson, Executive Director of Apprenticeships and Workforce Solutions in the City Colleges of Chicago. I think that as we did the preparation for this panel, I wanted to just sort of point out this is a group of very forward-thinking individuals that have taken work-based learning in new directions. This is not new. Community colleges don't do a lot of theory. We learn for application purposes. So when you think about work-based learning, it's not a conversation that just started a minute ago. But of all the people across the entire country that are doing that dialogue, these four are particularly unique to bring some light to bear. So I think I'll start out by asking each one in turn to answer a very simple framing question, which is that as you are all forward thinkers, as the audience and everyone else thinks about developing work-based learning opportunities in community colleges, what do you consider high quality and meaningful work-based learning that is warranting of attention? So why don't I start?
Okay, thank you. For us, I think, ultimately we're trying to move people to careers. And so we want our work-based learning experiences to unlock the ability for students to be able to communicate to employers that they are ready, willing, and able to contribute. And the best way to do that is to have done that before and be able to point to examples of how you've made contributions to businesses in the past. So I think, for us, it's really important that students are given an opportunity to develop soft skills, work on communication skills, problem solve around all of the things that come up just by the nature of work. I mean, there's, conflicts, there's, two people telling you to do two different things, there's, challenges that have to be elevated, and how do we handle these things appropriately? And all of those are things that take place in the context of the workplace, which you just really can't simulate. You really can't substitute. So there really is no substitute for time in the chair. So it's really important that students have those experiences to take along with the technical skills when they're seeking long-term career employment.
That makes perfect sense. It resonates very well as we have this dialogue. Please.
I think about three things. I think about that it needs to be something that is directly connecting the student with the employer. This is not a project. This is a real relationship between the employer and the student. I think it is very important that it's aligned with their field of study. In the state of California, our chancellor has established very aggressive goals for how many students are going to pursue careers in their field of study. So I think that's critical. And then similarly, all of them, whether directly or even covertly, need to address those employability skills issues. Key. So those are my three.
That's a perfect starting point for this dialogue. Please.
Great. I would probably break it into two categories for looking at quality. One is quality in terms of a quality experience for the employers for whom there would not be the opportunity for the students otherwise. So it does need to be, as one of the speakers said in the first panel, it's not a charity case. It is meeting a real need for the employer. Now, the employer does realize that they are investing some extra time in that experience so that they can be building their pipeline, but that is still fulfilling the need of the employer. So that's first and foremost, it must be employer focused. And then from the standpoint of the student, as Hayden was saying, the employability skills. Now, if it's a good work-based learning experience, they will sort of naturally get that. They'll be in the work setting. Now, we do see a full continuum. In North Carolina, we really prize the continuum of work-based learning. And so while one could say registered apprenticeship is the Cadillac of work-based learning programs, and certainly we love what it does for students in terms of that portability, that credential that's portable, and that progressive wage scale, and that's fabulous. We also recognize that each form of work-based learning has a different purpose, and we actually have seen, I can touch on this more later, but we've seen in North Carolina quite a bit individual employers as well as institutions using the different tools together. And so I'll talk more about that later.
I can't wait. Yes, please.
Jen, regardless of where the work-based learning falls on the scale, whether it's a job shadow all the way through apprenticeship, really it's about defined expectations on both sides for the student and also for the employer, so that when a student goes into a working environment, and I'll use manufacturing, one thing about Utah people don't understand is we are a very much a manufacturing state. Most people don't think that way. And so we've got a couple of generations of students that don't know what technical manufacturing really is all about. And as a parent, I'm guilty as well. But having defined expectations when a student goes into a working environment, that it's not going at the speed of education or the speed of higher ed, which is somewhat a little slow, but it's at the speed of industry. And working in that environment, whether it's something as simple as being in a job shadow or truly through an apprenticeship, whether it's a federal apprenticeship or an industry-recognized apprenticeship, and we'll talk more about that later. But I think if the students and the industry partners both go into it, and whether they're meeting in the classroom and or at their job site, as long as they understand, hopefully, what the learning outcomes are and what they're going to get out of it, at that point, then I think they're off to a good start.
I think that's a perfect segue into the next question that I wanted to frame for you, because again, with these highly different settings, having a partnership with an industry entity that wants to work in the state of California, you're talking about 118 different community colleges. That looks and feels very different than how it works in North Carolina, which is very coordinated, and they move in sort of lockstep with one another in thoughtful ways. Totally different in Chicago when you have lots of different partners and players. I mean, that's multiple investments. And I know your campus. Correct. So it feels different. So this question is going to be very different for each of you. But the biggest task, I think, about dealing with work-based learning is really getting those employers to buy in. So how have you gotten them to connect with you, particularly related to the on-the-job components, and encouraging them to participate? Please.
Sure. So one of the things that the Foundation for California Community Colleges does, which I'm with, is serve as the employer of record for students. So when we talk to employers, one of the biggest things that they come up against, they want to do this, they want to engage, but the administrative burden and the workers' compensation and risk is just too great for them to take on, or that's at least the response you get. And so for 20 years, the foundation has provided this service where we take on the administrative burden, we take on the HR and cover the workers' compensation. And that has opened up major doors for employers. So I think the relationships are absolutely critical, and also just addressing some of the boring barriers. It helps a lot. It opens up a lot of businesses and a lot of industries to being willing to provide paid work experience in particular.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think, and echoing some comments that were made earlier, I think one of the best ways to engage with employers and to keep them coming back is to help them solve a business problem. Like, to the extent that we can be part of a solution, we're going to create a long-term value for that employer, and they're going to be very interested in working with us. The other thing I would say is that we need for them to understand that we care about their requirements. And so to the extent that they talk about job descriptions and key requirements and things that are needed for employees to be successful, and our ability to sort of articulate how our curriculum can align with that, and adding in whatever enhancements or extras to be able to really hammer those things home, I think is another really important way to add value to the employer, and have them to continue to engage with us.
Completely agree. Want to add anything else?
I would say from a systems perspective, we are not trying to get in the way of our individual community colleges. We have 58, but we do have a variety, as you mentioned, some of which have 60,000 students and some of which have 6,000 or many fewer. So what we have done is with our state funding for, I'm talking about apprenticeship, recently, a couple of years ago, the community college system in North Carolina, apprenticeship has been numerous places, and it has landed with us. And so we have really tried to support that with consultants that are kind of set, as well as using our federal investments. So thank you to our federal partners who are here to support regional coordinators that can, particularly in our more rural areas where work-based learning and particularly apprenticeship is not as common, to facilitate more of those employer partnerships. We also have sort of cross-fertilize with our sector partnership efforts. And so wherever possible, we try to connect where there's already engagement with sectors, especially as we are looking to broaden the sectors that we're working with.
The one unique thing about Salt Lake, and people don't realize, it's been deemed one of the most diverse economies, Salt Lake County, in the country. And so we're not just working with manufacturing, transportation, energy, et cetera. And so when we work with an industry partner, first and foremost, it's about collaboration. We have wonderful partners throughout the state. Our Governor's Office of Economic Development, our Economic Development Corporation of Utah, which brings in new businesses and talent to the state. And then, of course, our legislature. They work tremendously with us, and they help fund. And regardless of, for instance, like our first initiative was the Utah Aerospace Pathways, and it was primarily focused around, at first, it was focused around composites manufacturing because of the aerospace and defense manufacturers in the state. When a high school student got into that program, into their senior year, there was a 48-hour internship that was paid, but it was paid by the state. And there wasn't really any pushback when the state said, well, we'll pay for those hours for those individuals to be at the company. You know, some people ask the question, well, what is the company putting in? The company is putting in a tremendous amount of labor to work with those individuals. Everything from, you know, whether, you know, we don't have a workforce, we don't have our community college system is Salt Lake Community College. We're 10 locations and over 60,000 students a year. There are other institutions, obviously, in the state, but for the most part, we serve 40% of the workforce population. So as we work with our funding partners, there's also, once again, it goes back into defining the expectations, the financial expectations of a company, so that they understand that they will be taking some of their best leaders offline for X number of hours, whether it's to get that program going by coming into a classroom, and we have 7 different school districts that we work with that are in the county, whether it's to, once those students get on the job, and they're getting everything from a shadow experience to a hands-on experience, that is taking that very productive worker offline, and that's a cost. That's part of that ROI. What is the ROI? Only a company can define, is it a short-term game or a long-term game that they're looking for? And you know, that Utah Aerospace Pathways turned into the Utah Diesel Technician Pathways, which turned into the Medical Innovation Program Pathways, and then our IT pathways, and then finally we have some construction pathways. Because I can guarantee you, once a collaboration takes place and you're having success, the hands go up and says, you know, the question is, what about us? And when industry gets involved and you have such wonderful support from the state, in our particular case, then good things can happen, and they have.
Yeah, I would just add that on that note, you know, employers really like hearing from other employers. And in Chicago, we're very fortunate to have the Chicago Apprenticeship Network, which is led by, you know, some of our flagship apprenticeship programs at Aon and Accenture and Walgreens and Zurich. And they do a convening quarterly, bringing all of their employer relationships to a networking event, bringing apprentices there so that they have a chance to interact with actual apprentices, and really kind of setting the table, you know, for us to go and engage with these employers and talk about the work that we're doing and the successes that we're having with students. But again, I think, you know, when it gets down to, you know, is this, you know, work-based learning program, is this apprenticeship program right for my business, they really want to hear from another employer. So we're very fortunate to have that voice and to have that convening that really brings all those constituencies together.
I love that. And I love the conversation, too, that you two both shared about the value proposition and how you scale things effectively so that one sector becomes many. I mean, and you never let those things die, correct? I mean, that's the purpose. But now, having heard very loud and clear that the employer engagement, you know, looks and feels different, but it's essential, what other partnerships were important for work-based learning to really be effective? I mean, top of mind, I can think of many, but who in the constellation of a successful work-based learning initiative is top of mind for each of you?
I alluded to it earlier, but GoEd, our governor's office of economic development. They help drive some of the training in our state. EDC Utah, which is our Economic Development Corporation, but also our K-12 partners. We have an initiative right now. It's a brand new program, Talent Ready Apprenticeship Connection. But right now it's focused on Stadler Rail, a Swiss company, and they've been wanting to introduce the Swiss apprenticeship model, which by many people think is truly the leading apprenticeship model in the world. Well, they were very specific about not putting Stadler in the name of the initiative. It's TRAC, it's Talent Ready Apprenticeship Connection, because they want it to scale. They want it to go to another initiative, or they want it to go to other industries. What we have as a partner is we have a tremendous company that is now working with Salt Lake City School District and then working with Salt Lake Community College, so that the senior year, that student can start their apprenticeship program. They can take courses in high school and also what we call concurrent enrollment, where they can take credit courses at Salt Lake Community College their senior year. If they persist over 3 years, they will finish with an AAS degree in apprenticeship. And now here's something that as a parent, you look at it and you think, this is pretty cool. In the second year of that apprenticeship, now this 18 or 19-year-old person is part of the Stadler benefits package, and they're part of the sharing of the profit sharing at 19. And so we never use the J word, we never talk about jobs, because we talk about careers. And that's where it's all about relationships. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been at Stadler or the number of times that Stadler has been at Salt Lake Community College or the school district, and quite honestly, it's where the three of us and more come together.
Yo, please. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Whatever.
You go right on.
Oh, okay. I think partnerships with workforce boards are challenging quite often, but very important. We talk a lot about having folks in the college that know how to speak the language of business. And there's a whole segment of the workforce system that is what they do, and they're funded to do it. So we are seeing some colleges begin to share a resource and co-locate right there in the student services and career service centers. So I think looking at who is really great at what different kinds of things and figuring out how you can leverage each other's best resources and work together is going to be really important, and something we're trying to work on in California. It's a long road, but I think the workforce college partnership, they have to start speaking the same language or understanding each other's language, but leveraging each other's skills.
Let's go back to Anna.
And if I can just piggyback on that, our workforce development boards are extremely important in our partnerships. We have been able to work with them. Certainly our colleges work with them directly, but there are also times when our apprenticeship NC office will work very closely with them, so that if it is a student, maybe it's somebody who would qualify for WIOA adult, and so that they can get some of the support services. Maybe it's gas cards, maybe it's overcoming some of the barriers to participate in an apprenticeship, or certainly in other work-based learning activities as well. So I do want to piggyback on that. We also work with our Department of Commerce closely. Our governor's office, we were very lucky to be part of the NGA Work-Based Learning Policy Academy, and we had a fantastic experience. Everybody, I feel like all of the partners were already to some extent working together, but I think that really kicked it up a notch. And there's both our current governor is quite a proponent, and there's kind of ongoing infrastructure, because in the governor's office is a permanent North Carolina Business Committee Business Committee for Education that kind of over time and across administrations can keep things going. And one more thing I do want to touch on, Shanika had mentioned looking backwards and looking forwards. Our partnership with education partners is critical, and we have been really excited about a model working with K through 12 in which we work with pre-apprentices or youth apprentices. And with the help of our General Assembly, we were able to get a tuition waiver so that if they finish their activity at the high school level and within 120 days of graduation come to us at community colleges for an apprenticeship, the General Assembly is paying for their tuition at community college for the full time, which is an excellent incentive. It helps employers, it obviously, and it pulls it all together.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I'm going to come back to that point in 1 second, but I'm going to ask you, Paul, to share a little bit first. Please.
Just on the partners piece.
Please.
The other, I guess, thing to think about is, opportunities. We have a number of funding partners who have been very instrumental, JP Morgan Chase being one of those, I should mention, but a number of funding partners that have helped us really kind of stand up an apprenticeship office and really kind of work to develop a number of programs, models, and approaches across all 7 of our community colleges. And that work is really important because what we want to do is not recreate these programs from scratch. We want to learn from what's happening in North Carolina, what's happening in Utah, what's happening around the country. There's so many good examples of programs and ideas and models. We want to leverage those models and bring them back and create incredible opportunities for our students. So having a funding mechanism to do that is really important. The other thing I would mention is the 4-year universities as well. A number of our apprentices are really capable, bright students who are going to work in incredible jobs after an associate's degree, but who ultimately have their eye on a 4-year degree. And to the extent that we can set up a pathway for them that makes sense, where they can stay in the current job and pursue that 4-year degree while continuing to work, on a schedule that makes sense in an institution that's, local. We want to make those kinds of connections too. And then on the back end, or I should say on the front end, looking at the K through 12 system, we're working together on a youth apprenticeship program right now with CPS, trying to stand up apprenticeships in healthcare, in IT, and then also in healthcare, IT, and business. And so it's important that we're able to work with our K through 12 system to essentially pipeline those students into some of the programs that we have right now. And that's not necessarily a given. I mean, those students have lots of choices of what they can pursue academically, and it's important that we're able to get to them earlier and give them options and opportunities to, check out some of these other careers that really are growing and have a lot of opportunity.
Potential, right. No, the continuum of learning is wonderful. I'm going to stay on the partnerships because it said it's not a script. We could play with this a little bit. But I loved the employer portion. I love the non-employer partnerships that you all named. But I'd like to go back to what Ann said about having a governor's office position or post that sort of doubled down and said, this is such an important thing. Regardless of administration, we are going to continue to push this forward. Could you all, maybe those of you that are comfortable, speak to some of those kinds of positions in the political arena that really have been groundbreaking? So Chancellor support in the state of California, but others like that post that really have ensured that this is not just a concept for a few moments. It's going to be embedded into the fabric of the economic development wellness of that community for a long time. So please, anyone.
Well, I'll start. We have tremendous support from our governor's office and once again from our legislature to the extent that Utah Aerospace Pathways has been replicated 4 times into different industries. And it's because of the initial successes, but it's also because of the initial collaborations and the benefit that everyone gets when they work together for a common cause. And so while we do have an extremely diverse economy in Utah, the one thing that is common and consistent is collaboration. And when those above that are the decision makers in your state see that, and they see that it's really there's a technical college system in the state, and there's also the Utah system of higher ed. Well, we work together. And we work together so that we have articulations where our students are beneficiaries of a program that starts here and can end there. It's not linear. People have lots of stop-ins and stop-outs along the way. And so getting those individuals above to see, and part of it is being transparent. Part of it is being able to report out on an initiative or reporting out at any given time about what is going on and being open. Well, this initiative happens to be a little higher performing than this one, or so on and so forth. But it's just the idea that if the decision makers in your state see, if they see some organization or organizations that are truly genuine in their approach, and there are resources available, which we have a wonderful economy. They allow us to utilize those resources as good stewards of state monies.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sure. There are a few things going on in the state of California. So Gavin Newsom has committed to increasing the number of apprenticeships from our current 75,000 to 500,000 by 2029. So this is taking a lot of thought around reorganizing. I see some laughs. Around reorganizing how our workforce, Department of Apprenticeship Standards, labor, how we're all organized to support something that big, and what the partnership's going to look like between those groups and the community college system. So it's early days, but there's a large reorganization happening in those areas. Specific to the community colleges, our Chancellor Oakley, one of his goals behind his vision for success is that we will increase the number of students employed in their field of study from 60% to 79% in the next 6 to 7 years. Well, how are we going to get there? What we focus on is embedding work-based learning, stop talking about it as an add-on to traditional education, and let's start normalizing this as a core education strategy. And so that's happening. And to double down on that, they have reformed our community college funding formula. So it was in the past all related to apportionment or butts and seats. And now that's not the case anymore. By the 2020-2021 year, 20% of what colleges are awarded will be based on them meeting certain student success metrics. And one of those is related to students gaining a living wage. Well, how are we going to get them there? We feel like there's a lot of promise in work-based learning. So those are some of the big things happening in our state.
That's wonderful. Thank you. See, that was a great point that you pushed on. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, and in Illinois, the new governor, J.B. Pritzker, has released an executive order specifically around work-based learning and apprenticeship. And so there's a lot of activity that actually has been going on for some time. We have, through the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, a workforce innovation board that has specifically an apprenticeship committee, and we're trying to look at what was successful in some other states in terms of how to organize resources to support businesses to stand up these kinds of programs. And so we're embarking on a navigator intermediary strategy where we would have those resources distributed across the state that those businesses could tap into.
I think that's a really nice point also before we get to the next question. But the community colleges are incredibly collaborative. I mean, that's an exact model of how you want it to look so that we can scale things more effectively. We fail forward and we learn from each other's mistakes. But really, this is a beautiful panel, so thank you. Excuse me. So you all noted transparency, keeping up with the pace and the evolution of industry partners' needs, and also being thoughtfully collaborative. And I liked that, thoughtfully collaborative. sort of concept, but in order to do that, it takes good coordination, right? So there's a lot of moving parts when you're talking about statewide systems, when you're talking about a community like Chicago, which is just vastly different than it's not like, but these are relationships. So for Rick and for Paul, how does your institutions, or how do your institutions coordinate the work-based learning activities within, making sure that the department heads, faculties, and others that are involved stay current and comfortable, which is different, because it's one thing to be informed, but it's different to be comfortable. And then also, do you have like a person that's like running like a hub and spoke kind of model, or how do you structure it? So please, I'll start with you two.
So at City Colleges of Chicago, we have a Office of Apprenticeship, which is a small team. Myself, there's a director who focuses on partnerships, another director who works on building and structuring programs, and a couple other people that support the work that we're doing. I'd like to say that the experience around building these programs is actually very entrepreneurial in city colleges. There's we are working with individual colleges directly in terms of seeking relationships, having preliminary conversations, and then bringing that subject matter expertise to the table to build and structure programs, which is one way it happens. The other way it happens is these things are happening organically, in the colleges through their own relationships and through a desire to really, create these incredible opportunities for our students. And so it's important that we know about everything that's going on and support those efforts. But again, I think we really are more consultative in that we're working with multiple campuses on multiple programs, really just trying to bring to them whatever thought partnership or resources. We've leveraged a number of grants to try to move in a specific direction. And so it's very collaborative, and at the same time, it's quite entrepreneurial.
It's a good way to phrase it.
As one of our deans likes to say, we are a large, complex institution. We really have multiple points that work with apprenticeship and work with work-based learning. We do have the traditional apprenticeship office that in the past has worked with our technical trades, et cetera. Our career services operations work with many of the internships that are available to students at Solid Community College. And then through these workforce initiatives, through the governor's office, et cetera, a lot of those have fallen to either our division, which is the Workforce and Economic Development, and our program managers within that division, or some of the program managers that are in our School of Applied Technology. And so we have multiple points. There's certainly benefits of trying to bring them all and centralize them, but at the same time, there aren't any competing efforts that one group wants to overtake this group, et cetera. And with 10 different campus locations spread out over 24 miles, right now it works. And so that's our story, and we'll stick with it.
I love that. So I want to make sure we have time for open Q&A with the audience, but I definitely want to make sure that everybody who walks out of here also sees some of the coordination tools that this fine panel have assembled. So now I'm going to turn to Anne and to Hayden. Both of you in your states have developed technology to support the coordination of all of these efforts. So could you please speak to those tools, the Navigator tool, Launchpad, things like that, please? Either.
Sure. So as a part of our governor-led consortium, many different organizations. So when I spoke about partners before, I'm already thinking about probably all of the partners that I'd love to give a shout out to, and I don't have time to. But as part of that governor's-led work, as part of that NGA work, we had our Business Committee of Education and our governor's office, which that's part of, work closely with Fidelity Investments, which is one of our employers based in Research Triangle Park. And they had 3 staff people, pro bono investment, and they developed a Navigator tool. And those of you with smartphones, you can check my address. I believe off the top of my head, it's wblnavigator.org. And that is a tool whereby educators can look and share what their needs are around work-based learning. And on the other hand, employers can either share or look for what educators need. And so, I'm not sure, Shanika, I have to give a shout out, there's a shopping experience of sorts, so a little bit like Amazon, where you can put into your cart, you can say, I think I'm interested in having somebody come speak to my school. I want a guest speaker. No, I actually want a full apprentice opportunity, or I want to, you can kind of put that in your cart, and then it sort of helps bridge the divide. And so right now, if you go on there, you can see, you can look for, there's architecture firms, there's government, there's private sector, tech companies on there kind of sharing what they have, and then employers can do that as well. We're phasing it in, so it's starting with kind of the K through 12, the full functionality with K through 12, and then later on the community college component will also be part of that, so that there's more of an active interface between those two.
I really encourage everybody who's listening in, watching, and or in this room to go on and look at that. Can we hear about the California one as well, please?
Sure. So we've developed, with some support from JP Morgan, a tool called Launchpath, and it has some similar features. It's a place where we would say all learners, whether they're supported by the community colleges, adult ed, workforce, K-12, that you can build profiles of learners or students. Then intermediaries, generally it could be someone in a career services office or at a workforce board who's managing the employer partners, can broker different types of experiences. So it could be similarly anything from a classroom presentation or job shadow all the way to a paid internship. The other thing that it does is manage digital badges. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with digital badges. So it's an agnostic platform, so any badges that are awarded can be pushed out to any type of social media or professional platform. We've seen the biggest uptake with it actually in the workforce development space. There is this the last panel talked about readiness of students. What we've learned is there's a readiness component for colleges too. Where are you in your work-based learning program? And so what is it that you need to support that program? And so our largest client is actually the Portland, Oregon region, and they used it last year to place 2,000 students with 1,000 employers. So those are kind of those numbers where you really need some infrastructure to do this and do it well. So that's our experience.
Thank you for both of those. I do hope everybody goes and takes a look at them. As you mentioned that, though, it makes me think also of challenges, right? So implementation, but this is not always easy work. And it's good work, not always easy. And there will be challenges. But for everybody in the room or that looks to sort of have you all be the beacons of creative and forward thinking, what challenge would you say was sort of the most troublesome so that others can learn from that challenge and potentially pivot around it, if possible? What greatest challenge did any of you have?
I don't know if it's the greatest challenge, but certainly one that that is with me a lot.
Please.
Is that our students are coming from very diverse backgrounds, many of them in underserved areas with all kinds of challenges and a lack of the experiences that we all enjoy that have led us to our careers. And so, it's important that we support those students. Oftentimes, they're, one small hiccup away from, not being able to participate into a program. So, we really want to provide supports for them. But as we think about like what those supports look like, things like case management, things like online tools, and things like professional development, seminar kinds of things, and we think about moving from a couple hundred apprentices to moving to a couple thousand apprentices, how do you scale like case management? Like the answer can't be, if it takes 10 people to deliver 100 apprentices, we're going to have 1,000 people. You know what I mean? It's just not going to work. So we need to think creatively about additional resources, community-based organizations, about technology that we can really sort of leverage to support students, not only in their work environment, academically, but also personally, because a lot of our students have personal things that just come up that they just need some help with. And so to the extent that we can, deploy these solutions, at the right time, and have them available when they're needed, I think is a really important challenge that we really need to focus on.
Right, so it's the persistence to success, absolutely. Yeah. Would anybody, please?
Just to piggyback on that, a study came out recently from the Hope Center that 50% of California community college students reported being hungry, and 60% in the last year were at risk of losing housing.
Exactly.
So it's like, how can you expect people to perform at work well if you're hungry? I'm sure you've been hangry before. And what if that was every day? So what we're thinking about is the way we're organized. Our system is locally controlled, so every college looks a little bit different and does their own thing in a lot of cases. And so when we think about work-based learning design, it's sort of how do we, from the design phase, think about the whole student and what it is to make it possible for people that don't have the leg up already to participate and do well. So that's something we're really grappling with. I would say it's probably our biggest challenge right now.
Thank you. Please.
I've been trying really hard to narrow it down to one. I have a long list of challenges, so I might fudge it just a little bit. I'll talk about one challenge I feel like we have started to overcome, and then just in a kind of an unresolved challenge. So hopefully, maybe with the other panelists in this audience, maybe y'all can help us. So I think Hayden had mentioned being able to step in for the smaller and medium-sized employers, where particularly for apprenticeship, but even for other forms of work-based learning, it can sometimes be a lot. But in the apprenticeship space, we do have a number of colleges, and this is college-led, so kudos to them, that have stepped up to be apprenticeship sponsors. Yeah. And that really works well as a model, particularly if you're working in one industry and you've got kind of a network there. So that's one thing that I think has worked well for a number of our, both our smaller and medium-sized employers and also our more rural areas. The unresolved challenge with work-based learning, in my mind, is what about adults that are not coming through the K-12 pipeline? I feel like we've figured out some really great models for the K-12 to community college model, and I'm really excited about what we've done. I think the pre-apprenticeship tool has been great for us to kind of open some new doors. I am worried about adults. We would love to have a tuition waiver for adults and their related instruction, but that hasn't come about yet, and we are so grateful for what we already have. In a previous job, I did rural economic development grants, and it was really hard because we would have dislocated workers. We were focusing on dislocated workers, and there are some very humble folks who, are in their 30s, 40s. I'm about to turn 50. I'm saying that publicly. I'm not sure why. Who will come, and was it Robert De Niro? I never saw The Apprentice. Anybody see that movie? Who stepped up to be an apprentice, but there were a large number of dislocated workers in our rural areas that said, this is really hard. I know I've got to switch industries because we have a lot of traditional industries going away. Let me be an apprentice. And figuring out how to kind of get in that pipeline is hard.
That's fantastic. And I totally would take the extra points because those are all good. Those were fabulous. Thank you.
I don't remember 50.
Oh, thank you.
As far as the greatest challenge, it's really our greatest opportunity, and that is with the adults. The economy is wonderful, but not everyone is benefiting from a robust economy. And it's messaging these opportunities for whether it's, the one thing you're not going to do at this point, and we studied the Ready SC model, Ready South Carolina, before we put into Utah, a program called Utah Works. But that model was put into place when the unemployment was 9 or 10%. And when it's 2.8% or 2.7, it's very difficult to have a value proposition for an individual that, number one, may or may not have finished high school. Number two, doesn't think of themselves as a college-bound individual because they're first generation. 63% of our students are first generation. 73% of our students work. And so to get to an adult that is, underrepresented, underemployed, and somehow, some way cobbling together an existence to feed their family or whatever the obligations are, that's great. But at the same time, we have to have an avenue to reach them and for them to trust us that they can come in and do that. JP Morgan Chase was very instrumental in us reaching out to a group of intergenerational poverty population. We're in our 5th cohort of individuals that we work with our Division of Workforce Services in the state. We identify those individuals and we bring them into a 96-hour training program that really we double because, half the day is spent on technical training and some online pieces, but the other half is to round out their expectation and their ability to get into the workforce and what some of those opportunities are in medical device manufacturing. When you have a celebration that has a cohort of 10 or 12, and you put 150 to 200 people in that room for that celebration, tell me that doesn't mean something to that family. That potentially is a cycle breaker. And we need more of those opportunities to get to individuals that will go to a company and not have 2 or 3 part-time jobs, but to go to a company and now have a career path with all the benefits that probably most of us enjoy. And so the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge is one and the same. And, the difference for me is as things either start to relax, if they ever do, I won't use the R word for the other thing, but as things start to settle down, I hope we're as creative and as servant-oriented as we are now, because then we know we're doing it for the right reasons.
That's wonderful. So I want to let everybody in the audience know we're going to keep on the clock, and we want to give you guys the most amount of time to ask questions. So if you are in the audience watching, please keep tweeting at the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. But before I turn over to audience Q&A, I'm just going to go down the line. Is there any final thought that you would like to impart to everybody that's been listening about this topic and about work-based learning today?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, we're at a really special time in that, the retirements of the baby boomers are happening at such a fast rate. Unemployment is so low. This is the time to figure this out. This is the time to really create these really strong pathways such that, when those economic conditions change, employers are still going to be able to rely on those pipelines for talent. I think that's so critical, and we really need to seize the moment.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think we would all benefit from not building work-based learning systems in silos. Those cross-sector partnerships, I think, are key. So we aren't bugging businesses about the same thing all the time, separate from each other. I also think normalizing work-based learning as a core education strategy, like I said before, is really important. And then the last thing is that making sure that as we're building relationships with employers, that they aren't one-to-one, an individual to individual, because people are going to move on. So making relationships that are institution size versus, one faculty to one contact at an employer is going to be really key for the long term.
I'm going to piggyback on one comment and offer one more, please. And that is the normalizing. Our cross-agency group that's been looking at work-based learning as part of the NGA work, their big vision, our big vision, let me embrace it, is work-based learning as a cultural norm. And whether that's the fact that apprenticeship is seen as the other and maybe lesser four-year degree, or maybe you just don't build it in because you've got so many other academic credits you want. So I would say we all need to be thinking about in our various places, how do I influence making that a cultural norm, building it in even where, we don't have enough room in the coursework to offer it.
Thank you.
But, and also, I will also just share their tagline, experience more. So hopefully that can catch on as we all have this culture of work-based learning. And then the final thought is simply remember that we would have no work-based learning if it's not for the employers. So be focusing on them, letting it be led by them, and being flexible to their needs.
Perfect. And I think we're going to ask you to do it very briefly because I want to make sure we get audience microphones, please.
I can make it simple. There's never been a better time or a more important time to work at a community college. And it's nice that people are recognizing that. Now it's incumbent upon us to go do it.
Thank you for that. I'd like to open it up to anybody in the audience. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask this fantastic panel? We've got one to the right here.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Ross, Director of Education at AMT, the Association for Manufacturing Technology. So I have that manufacturing industry perspective that I've been thinking about. And in the first panel, Shanika said we want to accelerate the development of a diverse talent pool. And that, I almost fell out of my chair because I love that so much, because we're at a crossroads of what work looks like, right? In 25 years, half of the current jobs won't exist. So how, with manufacturing comprising mostly of small and medium-sized companies, how do you convince those small and medium-sized employers that models, training, credentials, upskilling is a good thing? They see it as a good thing, but they also see it as a means for poaching. I hate to say that word, but the fear of poaching is almost greater than the fear of having no one to run your operations.
Because you get the artificial inflation of wages when they start poaching. As far as, first and foremost, we don't go to them with a credential and say, this is going to solve your problems. Now, oh, by the way, what issues do you have? Listen to those small and medium, because they don't have individuals that they can send to advisory boards and things. They need to be on the floor doing the work. So you meet them at their location, and that goes out. I have a team that does that, including myself, of course. And so it's a value proposition of listen to what their needs are, listen to where their gaps are, and then usually what ends up happening is you have this program, but they want this program. It's about being flexible design and intentional design.
Thank you. The next question?
Yeah, I'm Bob Lerman from Urban Institute. I'd like to find out a little bit about numbers and the numbers of apprentice apprentices, but even more important is the question do you have more apprenticeship offers than people who want to go into those offers? Or do you have more people that would like to go into apprenticeships, but you don't have the offers?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think.
And how many do you have?
Okay. So, we have roughly a dozen programs that are up and running right now. They're all different, so I have some with, Fortune 100 companies that are bringing 20 apprentices in at a time annually, or 20 apprentices in at a time, twice a year. So, and then I've got a program that has two, one that has 4. So they vary in terms of their size. I think, once an apprenticeship has, been run, a program has gone through a cycle, there seems to be a lot of demand. I know for, for students. Yes. There seems like in the Aon apprenticeship, the first time we ran it, there were 300 applicants for 20 spots. We've seen similar numbers like that for that particular program. It's a very differentiated role. I mean, those are not jobs or places that typically show up in the Career Center that students have access to. So that's a bit of a special program in that regard. I mean, Accenture is the same way. We've got a lot of students interested in those programs as well. So, I mean, I'd say that right now we're in a mode where we're just trying to stand up more programs to keep up with that student demand.
Please.
I'm going to say a few words. I don't know the second half well enough to answer, but I will say 11,399 apprentices. I will say that before Hayden says anything, because once California speaks, it doesn't. But we have had a 44% increase in the last couple of years. So we think some things we're trying may be working very well.
And I would just share, so the big number is 75,000 apprentices, but exactly, building and trade. So there is a significant investment right now. It's called the California Apprenticeship Initiative. And the whole point of that program is to establish apprenticeships in new and innovative sectors. So that could be anything from advanced manufacturing to healthcare. We're actually in the process of establishing a public service apprenticeship program because we have a huge gap there that's coming with the silver tsunami. And so the numbers aren't great in terms of being able to calculate what it is, because we're also in that, standing up new programs, but there are about 80 grantees that are a part of that are going to be starting up new and innovative apprenticeships. So time will tell. But we know we need the numbers. We know that we need to get students engaged and break down some of those barriers for employers to engage as well.
So we have approximately 3 more minutes. I can take one more question. Yes, please. Tell us who you are.
I'm Daniel Keene from the Urban Institute, and I was glad to hear Ann talk about how well the K-12 pipeline for apprenticeship works in North Carolina, because usually I think you see that the youth apprenticeship is not well connected to the registered system. So I was wondering, how is youth apprenticeship organized in North Carolina? Do the community colleges play a role to make sure that there's a registered apprenticeship ready, or is it just the tuition waiver that kind of attracts them into the registered system?
So a lot of that work, a lot of the hard work really happens at the individual community college level, working with their K-12 system. But we do have the infrastructure, since all of that is, apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, all of that's in one place, and pre-apprenticeship. So we can help facilitate some of the relationships, but in many cases, they're already there. I will also say that this is a totally separate issue, but keep in mind that a very large percentage of community college enrollment right now is actually high school level. We've got so much dual enrollment, so there's some built-in communication, but a lot of that really happens at the local levels with some regional. We do have those regional coordinators, and then we've got the system office and our regional consultants who can, or our apprenticeship consultants who can help as well. Does that answer your question?
So I want to thank JP Morgan Chase for the thoughtfulness of this group and assembling it through Urban Institute, but I would also ask you to join me in thanking this esteemed panel that brought the knowledge here. Thank you all for this time.
Thank you. That was awesome.